Okay, and what I want to do in this video is give you an introduction into one of the most important parts about economics. We're going to talk about money and wealth, and we're going to talk about what makes an economy rich. So this is the start of a series of videos that is going into the relationship between money and wealth. So the very first question that we have to talk about now is, why are some countries rich and other countries poor? Okay, why are there certain people in the world living in these types of conditions, whereas there are other people in different parts of the world living in these types of conditions? Okay, now, genuinely, before we start, this is one of the most important questions for mankind. All right, absolutely true. It is not just an economics question. It is a humanitarian question, okay? But to make it more relevant to those of you that are studying economics, if you understand this, you'll know more than your parents, and essentially it's half the course. So just keep that in mind. Now, this series of videos is actually something that I think the first time you watch them, you'll find it very difficult to get your head around. It's very difficult to understand. And as you go through and watch more and more videos and you study more and more about economics, you should come back to these videos and see if you understand them. Because if you do, then you are, like absolutely ahead of the vast majority of people on the planet. And that's not a bad thing to be able to say about yourself. So the first thing here is, it's always a good idea to understand what you're talking about before you speak about something. So we're saying, what do we mean by rich, wealthy, or a high standard of living? And that means that we have a good material lifestyle. So in certain countries and certain populations in different countries can eat and afford to eat in restaurants like this, whereas unfortunately, some people are mired in abject poverty and are looking through scraps for food, okay? What we mean by rich or wealthy means that you can live in reasonable housing, okay? So living in nice houses as opposed to this unfortunate situation that we see here. You have reasonable, modes of transport in some way. It doesn't have to be a car, it can be a bus, as opposed to, having to lug all your stuff around on a makeshift cart. You have access to good healthcare, okay, as opposed to, unfortunately, the vast majority of people around the world have no real access to modern healthcare. You have access to education. This is the University College Dublin, which is actually where I went, as opposed to no education, okay, and forced to sell things on the street, or even worse than that, potentially be in a situation like this where we have child soldiers. So the question is, what do we mean by rich? Why in first world countries are there no child soldiers, whereas in other third world countries there may be? And there certainly are, not just maybe, but there certainly are. So what do we mean by rich is that essentially you can consume a lot. Okay, you get to be able to consume the goods and services that you want and need. Now, not all of them, and we're going to come back to it because you'll never be able to get everything that you want because of what we've talked about as scarcity. But what we're saying is, what we're defining as wealthy is that you can consume a lot. You get to buy, or you can afford to have a lot of things that you want and need, okay? But this is important now, not just frivolous things. And this is why we started off, why are some countries rich and other countries poor? This is what we're getting to now. It's not just like, frivolous things like designer clothes and, fancy cars and, very expensive makeup for ladies, all this kind of stuff. It's not just that. It's important things, okay? Like what we talked about in the previous side, like education, healthcare, housing services, all of that kind of stuff. So in order to try and explain why certain countries are rich and other countries are poor, what is the distinction or the characteristic which makes certain countries rich versus other countries poor? Why does this disparity exist? Well, we're going to create what's called an economic model. And an economic model is simply an oversimplification of reality with the view of explaining an important point and accurately explaining an important point. And this, what we're going to talk about now, absolutely does that, okay? So we're going to set up this scenario here. Robinson Crusoe was a story written about an English sailor who was shipwrecked on an island, okay? So it's based on a book by Daniel Defoe, all right? There have been, he is shipwrecked on an island completely on his own, and there was a remake of it with Tom Hanks in it called Castaway. So that was your modern day version of the old story. Okay, so he was a sailor shipwrecked on an island. Now, the question that we have to ask is, what does Robinson Crusoe have to do to have a better material standard of living on the island? Okay, that's the question that we're talking about. And remember, we're talking about consumption is the definition of wealth. So, if he manages to build himself a shelter, is he better off? And I hope you would see that absolutely he is better off, simply because he's inside, away from the elements. He's sheltered from the heat, hopefully in the summer, and the cool in the winter. Okay, he has a better standard of living because he gets to stay inside rather than have to sleep outside under the stars and, be bitten by bugs, so on and so forth. Now, the next question is, let's say he manages to build himself an irrigation system. Is he better off? And what I mean by an irrigation system, he manages to transport water. He manages to build, in a sense, an aqueduct, a pipeline from the lake where there's fresh water to his shelter that he's just built. And that saves him having to walk like a mile a day with 2 buckets and then carry those 2 buckets heavy with water on the back to his shelter. And is he better off? Well, again, I would hope you could see that, yes, absolutely, he is better off, simply because now he doesn't have to make that 2-mile journey and carry the heavy water, and all he has to do is he can just turn on the tap and get fresh water whenever he wants by his shelter. If he manages to fashion himself some fishing equipment, is he better off? Well, again, I hope you would see that, yes, he is. And just to be clear, what he's actually done now is produce capital. He's made an investment, which is the production of capital goods. Is he better off? Well, yes, he is better off, simply because now he can catch more fish. And if he can catch more fish, what can he do with it? He can eat more fish. So he's eating better, and therefore he's better off. Now, the next question, and this is the part that people don't seem to understand, or at least find it difficult to make the connection between the two. Could we say that he is richer? And the objection that most students give is, yeah, kind of, maybe, sort of, but like, he's not richer because he doesn't have more money. Okay, well, obviously he doesn't have any more money because, like, he's on an island, right? Where that money, would be useless because he's stranded alone. But don't forget, we're talking about our definition of wealth or a good material lifestyle is you can consume a lot. Now, again, I'm trying to be general with my terms, so consume a lot. What does that mean? But at the very least, what I hope you would be able to accept is, if you can consume more, you are better off. And as such, you are richer. So let's go back to everything, right? He built himself a shelter. Is he better off? Yes, we've answered that question. Is he richer? Well, can he consume more? And it might be a bit abstract of a concept, but he is consuming housing services. Okay, he is consuming them from himself. He was the one that built them, built the shelter, no problem there. But he is consuming more. He is consuming housing services, which allows him a better material standard of living. And as such, according to our definition, which I want you to take on board because it applies to the real world, even in this overly simplified abstract model, yes, he is richer. He is consuming more housing services than he was previously, so as such he is richer. With the irrigation system, is he better off? Well, he's consuming more water now. So yes, he is better off, but the question is he richer? Yes, he is richer because he's consuming more, or at least in a position where he can consume more, and as such now he is richer. That's our definition of wealth. To when he builds the fishing equipment and now is eating more fish, well, is he better off? Yes, we've answered that. Is he richer? Yes. He is consuming more, or at least can consume more. And let's say it might have taken him, 5 hours to catch 5 fish. Now with the fishing equipment, it may only take him half an hour or an hour to catch 5 fish. And that means, let's say it takes an hour to catch the 5 fish now with the new fishing equipment that he has. That means he's got 4 hours extra to do other things and make himself better off in that way. So for each of these, with the production of the shelter, with the production of the irrigation system, with production of the fishing equipment, which allowed him to catch more fish or produce more fish, if you want to look at it that way, he is richer. Absolutely 110%. And that's what I need you to understand. Keep that in mind, okay? Now, again, as I said, most people measure wealth in terms of money. And, in the economy, that's 100% true. I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm trying to refine your thinking over the next series of videos. But what do you want money for? And what you want money for is because it can buy you things. And the more money you have, in general, the more stuff you can buy. And when you buy that stuff, you are consuming those things. So that's why people want money, is because it allows you to consume more. More money allows you to consume more. Everything else held constant, ceteris paribus, as we say in economics, which means all other things equal, nothing else has changed. Okay? Money is just pieces of paper. And the value of money lies in what it can buy you. And when you buy those things, you're trying to satisfy your wants and needs. So when he can consume more, or when you can consume more, or when I can consume more, we're richer, because even if we just produced it ourselves and there was no money involved, we can consume more, and as such we are better able to satisfy our infinite wants and needs. Now, to kind of give you a bit of an alternative view of it. If he found a load of money in the island, would that help him? Okay, so I'm recording this video now in Ireland, and we use the euro here. So if he found a load of money on that island, would it help him? Honestly, the best answer I get from students is, sir, he can burn it and maybe keep him warm for a night or two. I'm like, absolutely. But there's nobody to trade with. It hasn't increased his consumption, unless he burns it and there's consumption of fire. But like, it hasn't increased his consumption. It doesn't allow him to consume more. And as such, that money doesn't make him richer. Now, that's something that people don't get, and you're going to have to watch the rest of these videos in order to get a greater understanding of it. Okay? If you found a load of gold on the island, would that help him? Well, what would you do with that gold if you found or were granted gold legally in a modern economy? Potentially you would sell it, you would get the money, but what do you want that money for? You want that money to buy those goods and services in order to consume more, but those goods and services wouldn't come into existence unless they were produced. And I've kind of gone ahead of myself now. What's the difference between these examples of money and gold that he found and what we talked about in the previous slide, which is the shelter, the irrigation system, and the fishing equipment? Well, the thing is, with all of those previous things, Robinson produced something that made his life better. Now, I'm not saying that you have to produce everything yourself, but what I am saying is something must be produced in order for you to consume it. And that's the important thing. Robinson produced those things and they allowed him to consume more. Money is only something that we use to trade with each other for items that we have produced or had some part in the production thereof. Even if that production only includes, you organising the importation of one goods from one country and selling it into another. You're producing a service there. So there's a part of that. You've been responsible for part of the production of that good when at the point of sale, because the person in that other country wouldn't have been able to buy it unless you had provided those transportation services. If nothing is produced, think about this. Money has no value and can buy you nothing. This is what we're talking about. So, again, we're coming back to what made Robinson richer and what is the reason or the answer to the question that we posed at the start of the video. Why are certain countries very, very rich and other countries very, very poor? Well, as we just say here, what is true for Robinson is true for the economy as a whole. Production is the key to wealth for an economy. 110%. Production is the key to wealth for an economy. Our standard of living is defined by how we measure wealth, is defined by what we can consume. But we can only consume what has been produced. This is incredibly important. And the more that we produce, like cars, like health services, like education, this teacher here is producing human capital, i.e. knowledge, and that's going to make all of these guys and girls way more efficient and better capable of producing more valuable services with this education. Okay, the more we can produce means that we can retire early. Retirement is probably almost a 20th century invention. You had to keep on working until you died because of productivity. You weren't producing enough throughout your normal working age years in order to save some and have more to consume later on in your life when you weren't working. Okay? It is production that is giving us this high standard of living. If we produce more, we can consume more. And the more we produce, the more we can consume, and therefore the richer we are. Why are certain countries poor and other countries rich? Rich countries produce more goods and also a higher value goods than those unfortunate enough to be in the poor country. Quickly, let's go over what we've talked about. What are we defining as wealth? Well, simply wealth is the richer you are, the more you can consume. Okay, so consumption is kind of what we're defining wealth. But let's take it a step back from that. We can only consume what has been produced. Okay, absolutely true. Somebody must have produced something in order for us to consume it. In the Robinson Crusoe model, Robinson was the one that was producing things. In a more modern economy, I am producing teaching services. I sell my teaching services for other people, and I get money from that. And with that money, the value in the money lies in what I can consume. With that money, I can buy goods and services that were themselves produced previously. And the more that is produced in an economy, the more goods and services we have to share around with everybody. I know we don't do it like a raffle or a commune, but we can share more goods and services with each other, and as such we can consume more, and therefore we are richer.